For those of you who don't know cultural impact, what we do, we work mostly in getting people to know each other better, in order to work better together, to get into conversation. So what we're doing today together with Nadzrin and Asma is very much in that spirit, to welcome all of you and engage you in this kind of conversation to create more happiness and better performance in organizations.
What I realized is that when I entered the American company, all my cultural assumptions were challenged. You know, things that I grew up with, you know, to be obedient, to be tolerant, to be soft-spoken, all those were not, I suppose, accepted in the sense that, you know, these are the qualities that I need to work on, you know, if I want to be acceptable in an American work culture.
I started work as a journalist for about 7 years. But if I go back to my university degree, I actually studied communications. And one of the best parts of communication is culture. So I actually did study anthropology. And my late grandfather also had a master's in anthropology. So there was a bit of a thing going on in our discussions in the family. We love culture because I live in a multicultural family. I have so many, I don't know, relatives from around the world that, and so many religions, so many different practices. There were times when we would have Christmas celebrations, Hari Raya and Chinese New Year all over. So that gave me a very unique perspective. But being raised Malay, from my mother being raised Malay, gave me that unique perspective as a Malay in a multicultural perspective. When I started work, my first job as a journalist was in a very Malay organization. You walked in, you left your shoes outside. So if you want to identify whether it's a Malay organization, very small one usually, their shoes are outside the door. And you go, what's this doing outside? It's probably because they worked in a big company and then they left and created their own smaller company, and they determined what the culture would be in their company. So if you're Chinese or Indian working in a small Malay company, I bet you'll still leave your shoes outside the door because that's the policies of those companies. So without going into too much detail, any company, any culture is determined by who the authority is in that culture. And in a company, who builds the policies, who creates those policies, it is leadership. So I moved through a couple of Malay companies. And then, and when I say Malay, I mean the owner is Malay, the culture is typically Malay. You come in, nobody actually, I'm looking for the right word, but everybody meets expectations, right? Everybody knows the expectations. And then I joined a multinational company. Oh no, first off, I joined a company headed by a New Zealander. And not as much different because most of the people working there were Malaysians. So there was still no problem there. Then I joined a company called Accenture, which is an MNC, for 7 years. And that helped me to recalibrate because I would do things that my colleagues did not understand. And we work globally. And I work in a learning center where people travel from the rest of the world to that learning center. And people will ask me about my culture, about my religion. And that was when I realized, yeah, I know it, but I can't explain it. It's like English, right? Does anybody know what present tense past participle is? You can speak it, you know it's wrong. You know the sentence is wrong, you just cannot explain why it's wrong. So that's pretty much what it was like for me as a Malay, as a Muslim. I know what it is, I just can't explain it to you. So that was it wasn't a rude awakening, it was a very interesting awakening because it helped me to understand more about who I was, where I came from.
How did you view yourself? Because we're coming from, I mean, we have a lot of French people in the audience here. We're talking about ethnicity and race and origin is very taboo. And coming into Malaysia, it's almost the first thing that everybody ask anyone, you know, you're Malaysian what? So how did you view yourself as Malays in an organization?
Yeah, I think when you talk about being Malay, it's very difficult to define what exactly is a true Malay, because we have so many definitions in terms of, are you a Malay first or a Muslim first? And I find that those are some of the things that I had to grapple with, as we enter, say, a foreign-based organization. I think for me, entering the American company was quite easy, because I had studied abroad and also had been exposed to multicultural influences. But if I were to enter the organization not knowing or not having the experience of working with different cultures, I think it can be a culture shock. Going back again to the organizational culture and what I mentioned earlier, a lot of the cultural dimensions that I have come to know as a Malay girl. I'm a baby boomer. I don't know how many of you in this room are baby boomers, but that's how I've been programmed to accept the fact that as a baby boomer, you're taught to be less outspoken. You shouldn't challenge your superiors. You're supposed to be obedient. And these are some of the things that I find very difficult in the American work setting, where, I find that one has to be able to toot your own horn. In other words, you have to speak up for yourself. Nobody else will. So this is what I find kind of difficult initially, that in an American company, you have to project yourself. You have to project your views. You have to articulate some dissenting views too. And these are some of the things that I find to be quite difficult initially. But thank goodness, I have an American boss who was very positive, about me being able to speak up and work independently and so on. And so it was easy. But when he left, the Malaysian manager steps in, and that can be difficult. Because while you work in the same organizational culture, but the ethnic values of your manager carries into the organization.
And the first time actually was not the organization. It was me entering university. And I think if we have some Malaysians here from KL, and if you were city-born, there's not much difference between being city-born and being non-Malay. I'd say when you meet someone from Kelantan or you meet someone from Kedah, and they look at you like you're an alien because you were born in KL. And everybody in Malaysia, depending on what state you're from, has a particular view. It can be good, it can be bad, can be stereotypical of people from certain states or certain schools or certain backgrounds. And they're not racist to be, not per se, but they have a particular stereotype, right? So they look at budak KL, KL kids, like how we view, I don't know if you know this term, but it's called the Bangsar bubble. Within their own world, they believe everybody on earth speaks English. They don't realize that there are Kelantanis, there are Terengganu, there are people in other states. So I grew up a little bit like that. So when I went to university, it was a bit of a culture shock because I got to meet people from other states. So that was round one. Round two was when I went to work in Accenture. Then I got to meet a lot of things challenged my perceptions. One of my colleagues is Israeli, and I don't know what the word is, but my brain sort of stopped. I go, should I be friends with this guy? Should I be working with him? What? So there were times when I had to challenge, my perceptions were challenged, my beliefs, my opinions were challenged, my attitudes were challenged. And that was an amazing experience to be able to grow in there. So if the question is, how does it feel like? For me, it felt amazing But being prepared to come to this session today, I actually sent out these questions that you were going to ask me to other people, to other friends. And I got their answers back. And the answers are very, very varied, because some of them worked in MNCs, some of them worked in MNCs with Chinese MNCs. Some of them work in European MNCs, some of them work in American MNCs, and their answers were very, very different. Some face a lot of racism, some face a lot of sexism, genderism. In Accenture, and I'm not promoting the company, I think it's a very, very fair organization. It was a very flat organization. I could sit next to my CEO and complain to him. So I think it's not just not just the where the company comes from, but what the company culture is. I had a very good experience. To this day, I speak very highly of the company. So the responses are varied. Some of them say it depends on who your boss is. The company can be very bad, can be very racist as a whole because of who the leadership is, but your boss protects you from it. It could also be the other way around, right? The company is very fair, but you have a boss who chooses not someone from the same race or something like that. So again, from my perspective, I had a really good time. I made a lot of friends.
Two things you said that caught my attention. The fact that you mentioned racism. The other thing, and Asma, that's handing it back to you in a sense, when Nadzrin was saying about the difference between urban Malays and Malays from different parts of the country. And I remember that a few years back, Asma, you were doing a program for BFM. So for those of you who don't know, BFM is a Malaysian KL, Kuala Lumpur, Bangsar station, if I may put it using the term that you used. And I was quite surprised when you shared this experience with me, because I thought, you know, these are Malaysians, and yet as Malaysian, they needed to have a cultural induction on Malay people. So I don't know if you want to share a little bit on that experience you had, Asma.
Yeah, I think what I see often in my training sessions, I find that not many of us study our own culture. And particularly among Malaysians, you know, we grow up in a multicultural society, but I think our cultural literacy is quite low. What we have is tolerance. You know, we have a lot of tolerance. We live in harmony, but we are not curious about the other. And I think this is an area that I hope we will try and work on, you know, bearing in mind what is happening in the United States now, you know, with racism and what's, you know, chaos it can create, because there's so much pent up aggression. So I think in a multicultural society like Malaysia, I just hope our schools will try and introduce courses on intercultural literacy. You know, be curious about the other, and also try and discuss, you know, your unconscious biases, your prejudices. Well, you have to be very careful because it can be explosive, but I think you need to develop a vocabulary where you can discuss these issues carefully, you know. So I think, you know, when you talk about cultural awareness, I think more needs to be done in Malaysia.
Well, it's a very nice bridge to my next question, because often that's one of the big challenges when we talk about culture, is the sensitivity. And there is a lot of sensitivity around Malay culture in Malaysia. Religion is always the thing that nobody really wants to talk about, yet it's the elephant in the room. But yet in Malaysia, it is very difficult to dissociate Malay from Muslim, just as because it is set as such in the constitution. And a lot of the challenges that I see in organization, a lot of the questions that our clients have is how do we have those conversations around religion in the workplace? What's the impact of religion in the workplace?
If everyone came here expecting a simple answer, you're not going to get it. So I'll layer this as simply as possible. Number one, if you look at all cultures that practice religions, you will find that there are practitioners and there are non-practitioners. And that also happens in Malaysia with Malays and Muslims as well. Now, in terms of practicing, because Malays are also Muslims here, then what you do, how you do, when you do, is actually quite regulated. Originally, it is meant to be personally regulated. But the government has become quite involved in the last 30 years in matters of personal faith. Now, I'm not trying to open up politics. I'm just mentioning what is a fact. Okay, so whether you whichever side of the fence you sit on, we have noticed a greater interest by the governing authorities in what you do as a Muslim. So that has trickled down to people in authority, and that has trickled down to your neighbors as well. So what you do and how you do, whether you pray or you do not pray, people seem to think that they have the not authority, but they're allowed to call you out on it. Now, in Islam, there is a mechanism for you to do that. It's called advice. But some people take it a bit above that, and they practice a bit of a holier than thou. So that's the second part of my answer. What happens then is that people feel that they are forced to practice Islam, whereas as matters of faith, it's between you and God. Now, whether you're religious or not, whether you believe in God or not, this is how it is. It's between you and Him, and it's your practice, it's your faith. But there's also external structures, so social structures in the religion that allow you to practice together. So when you take that and you take the authority part, which is in the second part of the question, just the second part of the answer. So people see you pray or they say you not pray. So they think that they have the authority to tell you go and pray. Instead of advising you or, convincing you or influencing you, they go straight to giving you orders. And this can come from anybody. Anybody who's older in the organization, they look at you and you're a woman and you're not covering up your hair, and they think they have the authority to say that out loud to you. To such an extent where, and I'm diving deeper into this, I know, Marie, this is where you want to go, but to such an extent where a high-level English is never my strong point. A high-level professor who's presenting at a seminar and she doesn't wear her head cover, she's presenting very high-level stuff, data-oriented stuff. And the first question that pops up is, why you're not wearing a headscarf? Okay, so that's the third part of the answer, which leads into the fourth part. This also trickles down into the organization, where people who are the practitioners and non-practitioners, because there's a structure of religion and culture around them, they feel that not only do other people have authority over them, they also feel that they have a privilege to be Muslim or be Malay. So even if they don't pray, and you set a meeting at 1 o'clock, or so you set a meeting at 4 o'clock, some of them, using the word some, might take offense because you did not take into account that there's a prayer right there at 4:30. But you did not tell them in the first place. I mean, you as a Malay, you did not tell them in the first place. They expect that you know. They expect that the leadership should know. And this expectation, which I teach part of this in problem solving and communications. This is called shoulding, from the word should, not shoulder, but should. So it's hidden expectations. I expect you to know this. And shoulding doesn't just happen at a racial level, it happens in marriage as well. I want to send that message as part of that last answer. Why people take offense easily? Because they believe that you know, they believe that you understand, or worse, they believe that you should know and you should understand. Okay. And I hope that clarifies that. They feel that there's a structure out there, and they also feel that structure protects them from you as the leader who wants to take advantage of them as a Muslim. But sometimes even they don't practice. They're not a practitioner. They take offense because you are trying to take away rights that they never practiced anyway.
I don't know how many in the room will know the definition of a Muslim Malay in the Malaysian constitution. You know, it is in the Article 160, defines a Malay as someone who professes the Muslim or Islam, habitually speak the Malay language and conforms to Malay customs. So this definition is probably what defines, you know, the Malay in Malaysia. Yeah. So we are probably the only race in the world who is constitutionally defined. Yeah. So as a result, if a Malay is not a Muslim, then the law can take over. So that is why, you know, being a Muslim, there are obligations on you. You know, you have to understand the 5 pillars of Islam. So I would expect those who come here to work have to understand that. You know, the Malay, by definition, is a Muslim, and because he's a Muslim, he is required to understand the 5 pillars of Islam. And these pillars have an impact in terms of work, you know, work habits. So if you are an expat coming to work in a factory in Kulim, or in a maybe semi-urban setting, these are some of the things that you need to know. So I find that if you are going to work with Malays, you have to understand the Malay Muslim in Malaysia. And because religion is influenced by the culture, you know, the context of where you're working, you really need to maybe have someone, you know, share with you. Otherwise, you know, you may find that, you know, why do you need a prayer room at the workplace? You know, why are people disappearing on Friday? Or, you know, there's so many questions that you may not know because you may not have access to information that you should have, you know, when you come to Malaysia. So I think, Mari, you know that, you know, when foreigners come to work in Malaysia, they need a cultural orientation program. Otherwise, what they do is they will observe the Malaysian workforce, and then they will make analysis. And sometimes what they have in terms of observation and interpretation may be inaccurate because of their lack of or lack of understanding or lack of knowledge about the 5 pillars of Islam.
Thank you, Asma. And that was exactly the what brought us together with Nadzrin in the first place, to say it would be a good idea to have such a conversation, because many of the clients I have find it actually quite difficult to reach out to and understand and connect with Malay culture. So we're hoping today to give you a few clues.
Now, those of you who may, you know, may be knowledgeable, you know, about cultural studies. You know, some of you may have studied at the university. But over the years, I find that, you know, for a foreigner who comes to Malaysia, they need to understand the 16 cultural dimensions, because these are the dimensions that will give the backdrop or the background to why they do what they do. Like, for example, if you were to look at the left side, which talks about harmony, relationship, hierarchy, shame, high context, polychronic, collectivism, religious, defines very much the Malay and the Malaysian culture to some extent. Now, this is based on my research and also my studies working in a foreign company. So in a way, when I was doing my doctoral studies, you know, I was fortunate to be working in an organization where I was able to do my field work. So when I look at the cultural dimensions, obviously the American workforce or the American manager is all on the blue, the mastery, the task, the concept of equality, guilt, low context, monochronic, individualism, secular. So when I talk about, you know, the culture shock that I had when I entered the American organization is basically to do with this, because I was coming from the perspective of relationship. But in the American company, you got to get the task done. Once you get the task done, then you can decide whether you want to be friends. And then the concept of equality versus hierarchy. You know, that is why I find that, you know, when I first entered the American company, you know, I had the CEO came down to see me and, you know, put his hand up and say, hi, you know, I'm Gerald. And I know he was a CEO. Now, I can't imagine a Malay-based organization, you know, the CEO would do that. Yeah. So the concept of equality is so ingrained in the American work culture. And then the concept of guilt versus shame. You know, guilt, the locus of control is internal. You know, you decide what you want to do. Whereas, you know, coming from a shame-driven culture, I would be very careful about, oh, how will I be seen by others? I don't want to make mistakes. So this locus of control is external. Yeah, and then the low context. You know, the Americans are very, very direct, but the Malays are very blade, you know, we call it in Malay. But high context means you cannot be too direct. Yeah, because growing up in the Malay culture, you know, I recall my mother saying to me that you got to be, you know, indirect. You cannot openly say what you want. If you want to say something that may be difficult for the other party to receive, you know, you probably have to use a third party. And then the concept of monochronic, which is time. You know, Malaysians are known for being polychronic, never on time. But when you come into an American company, you know, you talk in the language of deadlines. You know, if you cannot meet the deadline, you're dead. You know, whereas Malaysians, we grew up with flexible, you know, flexibility, you know, in terms of time, you know, targets and so on. And then, of course, the concept of individualism versus collectivism. This is another another two dimensions that I find very difficult to adjust initially. And of course, religious, secular. So maybe that in, you know, in brief, you know, explains why I had that culture shock when I entered the American workplace, because the cultural dimensions were very different from what I used to have. I had come to know when I used to work in a Malay-based organization.
Okay, so if I hear you well, your advice is that for people to really understand where people are coming from, and using the cultural dimension is actually a really good start. Thank you, Asma. Nadzrin?
Let me share with you a story which happened to one of a lecturers, an engineering lecturer in the International Islamic University. So even this, right? He's from Jordan, and he is a professor in the university, and he has problems trying to get his staff do things. So he's Muslim, he's Jordanian, and that should be enough, right? That should be enough that they're all Muslim. His staff is also Malay but Muslim. That should be enough. But he runs into the same problems all of you have. So he was referred to me for help by a mutual friend. And I sat him down and I said, so what have you done with this guy? Have you sat with him? Have you taken out for lunch? Have you bought him teh tarik? Things like that. And the first thing he says, why would I buy him teh tarik? Isn't that bribery? And I immediately knew, okay, he doesn't get this. Number one, if you want to connect with a Malay, and I'm trying to go as stereotypical as possible so it captures as many Malays as possible. If you want to be friends with a Malay, if you want to capture their trust, go have lunch with them. Go have something, a drink, or you know, host. I'm going to use the word host them. Make them feel comfortable with you. Make them feel that they can trust you. When you promise them something, fulfill that promise. And it's not a sense of I'm going to do this for you. Here's the thing, and I don't know how to describe this, but we generally don't believe people's promises, because why? That's how we make promises as well. So unless you write it down, unless it's in writing, you will not be able to find that. You'll find that they go like, okay, so you promise them, I'll see you at 9, okay. And they roll their eyes, because if they understand the culture, right, their own culture, yeah, you're going to be here by 9:30. So they don't have high expectations. So if you want to influence a Malay, do it through food. I cannot explain it. I don't know how it works, but you start with food.
Yeah, Nadzrin, it has a lot to do with building relationship.
Yes,
You
yes.
know, before the task gets done, you know, you need to build relationship. That is why to do business in Malaysia and in Asia, you have to have friends who talk well about you. You know, that is why this thinking about tooting your own horn is very problematic, you know, because we grow up to have a sense of self that is a related one. It is not a separated self. You know, I am Asma, but I'm married to so-and-so. My father is so-and-so. You know, we are all connected and we are defined by the people around us.
So it's about getting in the in group and through.
It's about getting in the in group. It's about getting into the circle.
Yes, I think the richness of an organization is linked to its capacity to blend multicultures. If I take my personal experience, for example, the shock comes very fast coming from Europe, in the sense that setting up a factory, designing the drawings, starting construction, and suddenly somebody say, but where did you put the suro? The what? And here we go already very quickly to be challenged by our own concept of being completely, I would say, secular and coming with our own mindset as European to Malaysia. If you are not able to understand or be interested in the culture, the local culture, in particular the Malay culture, because it's the most dominant one here, you will make a lot of mistakes on the way. Another example, very simple one, which was mentioned by Asma as well, is on you as a leader, as a manager, you have some challenges from your HQ, some deliverables to meet. If you don't understand that your team has another notion of time than yourself, you are doomed. So you need to make sure you find a way to take with you your teams to make sure you succeed in your projects. And that means not changing their culture, but to find a way to also consider their approach to things to make it happen. And this brings me, with the biggest challenge is how much culture you can bring from the HQ and how much culture you have to embrace locally as an operation set up in Malaysia. And I would say this is probably the biggest culture. What we heard is that the biggest challenge, because what we heard is that most of those who joined international company felt very, very good in these companies, which have a different approach from 100% local companies. But how much do we give in and how much do we take from both cultures? I don't know where to draw the line, but it's important to create this blend, because this really creates the richness of the organization. Another take from what would be my understanding of the Malay culture is really the power of the collective over the individual. In the salary negotiation, in their collective agreements, in appraisals, it seems that what was important to my Malay team is to make sure everybody is on board and everybody is treated the same way. While in some other cultures, it would be mainly individualism and individual objectives that prime. So this is something we really experienced in one of my company, which is to rather focus on a collective bonus rather than individual bonuses, for example, which was coming from this understanding of culture. And I felt that this was quite successful compared to other organizations which are 100% on individual bonus, for example. And without the curiosity as a leader to understand the culture of the employees you are working with, the partners you are working with, you will never be able to really succeed in your organization. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jill. That's a very nice conclusion. And I think the curiosity is somehow here today by the number of people who have joined the session.
Find that Malaysians actually are curious when they see a foreigner. Like, for example, they will ask, you know, who you're married to, how much is, you know, how much, you know, they will get into the personal space, you know. So I thought maybe is that curiosity or just trying to strike a relationship, you know, to get to know you better. So when you talk about curiosity, what is the context you are in? In Malaysia, I believe, you know, our school systems have to consider introducing multicultural modules where you get into the area of sensitivities. Yeah, but we have yet to develop a vocabulary and we have yet to develop a curriculum or a syllabus where you begin to know the sensitivities of the other. So what we do now is we observe the we observe the behavior, but sometimes we don't understand. You know, we don't understand the significance, you know, of the behavior. Like, for example, you know, Muslims have to pray 5 times a day. Muslims have to fast, and Muslims have to perform the Hajj. Yeah. But how many of them know that in order to perform the Hajj, you have to do a lot of rituals? Yeah. To some extent, the rituals are quite challenging. Yeah. And then you have fasting, you know, fasting, then you celebrate Hari Raya. But before you celebrate Hari Raya, you must go through some hardship, you know, to some sacrifice, you know, and of course, you know, you have to also donate, donation, time for you to be generous and so on. So I think, you know, behind the rituals that we have, you know, for each religion, are we curious about the other? I mean, like, for example, Taipusam or Chengbeng for the Chinese, you know. The curiosity about the other, I think, needs a lot of attention. You know, we need to do that more, but I guess because it is such a, you know, Malaysia is a minefield of multicultural sensitivities. It is a minefield. You don't know where the minefields are until you step on them. So this is what we have to do. We have to navigate ourselves around the minefield so that we don't step on them, because if we do, you know, it'll be very explosive.
I saw a question about food.
Yeah. Even food, there's sensitivities. Yeah, you know, you want a Muslim or Malay woman, a friend to go with you, you got to be careful about not eating certain food, you know, certain drinks, you know. So those are sensitivities.
If I were to give you any tips, right, it would be number 1, mama food. I'm not kidding you. I'm not making fun of you. Mama food, which is safe for all, right? Because even the mamas, they don't serve beef. You will find this to be true. Because I mean, you look at me, I'm not 100% Malay anyway. We have Indian blood in us as well. So you will find that they don't serve beef. And they're quite respectful of their own family members who are also Hindu, some of them, and their neighbors. So mama food, football, at least badminton, that's quite a long time ago.
It's for the men.
No, I mean everyone. Sports and not politics. So yes, unfortunately, it is food right now. And anybody who makes fun of our food overseas will face the wrath of every single Malaysian, irrespective of whether they're Malay or not.
Was about what is important for Malay and in their life to be motivated. What is the meaning of their life? If we can be more specific regarding professional subject.
Yeah, I think for the Malays, yeah, you recall the slide that Mari showed, on the cultural dimension, the Malays are more likely to be very groupy. They like to be in a group. Their strength is derived by being in a group. Now, of course, we have Malays who are Western or educated, went to, foreign universities, and, their network of friends are probably more global and so on. But if you're asking me, the core of the Malay culture, or the Rumpun Melayu, which in the Nusantara area, we are very group oriented. So in other words, if you can harness the energies of the group, it will be a lot easier for you to manage. So I think what is important for foreigners to do when they come here is to really find a cultural interpreter, someone in your organization who knows the local culture, and become the mediator or become the intermediary when you have issues. Otherwise, what I have seen happening is you make observations, and the observations, then you make decisions. And when you make decisions, it could be based on inaccurate information. So this is where I think it is very important that any decision you make, it has to be accurate. Otherwise, you have to start the cycle again and, do damage control. I know, like, for example, I'm sure you heard that in Malaysia, you have this phenomena called the poison pen letters. I once had this discussion with my American manager. I said, why do they send me this letter? They never sign their name. They are cowards. Now, what do we do? So I had to go through the cultural dimension and say that, in our culture, we are very high context, and high context cultures, you are never direct. Yeah. So when you want to tell bad news, you go through a third party, or you go through anonymous letters, anonymous unsigned letters, because they cannot be too direct. Yeah, so they have to find a communication that is indirect, and the poison pen letters is that medium. So I think these are some of the things that you have to bear in mind, that while we are urbanized, maybe westernized, see a lot of movies from Western Hollywood production and so on, but deep down, I think, if you're talking about the bell curve of the Malays, we're still very conservative.
I would say that they are motivated by relationships. They are motivated by personal security. They want to know that they feel safe. I give a simple example about poison pen letters, about feeling safe, right? Why they do this is because they believe that you will be unjust to them, that there's no guarantee of them being treated justly. And if you remember this, Google, it happened several, I think a year and a half ago, a Google employee wrote an open letter, not a poison pen letter, but an open letter criticizing the Google leadership's decision about something that has to do with a decision, a policy that they made, and they fired him. So Malays especially believe that if I complain about somebody, if I say something openly, then the unfairness will happen, and I will get fired. I will lose my job. So I better do it the other way around. Now, I think that's not just Malay. I think that is typically global, because why would you have a whistleblower policy if people felt safe in your organization? Why would you even need to have that? So as more and more whistleblower policies pop up in Malaysia, I have noticed that more and more are speaking up because they have that channel now. When they don't have that channel, then you have these poison pen letters. So I would say that they are so used to working in organizations that are unjust within Malaysia, not saying outside, but within Malaysia. They've seen people being promoted because they were nephews or because they sucked up to the boss or stuff like that. So when you see evidence of that, you tend to, that your behavior tends to change. Right now, I know Malay friends who are whistleblowing because they have the right channel. So that's what I have to add to that.
She's what?
So,
European? A European?
Sandra is from France, I think, and so she wanted, a question was, what should I pay attention to, what not to do, how to be respectful within the Malay culture?
Oh,
I like Dr. Asma's question. What is she?
I had to see the context, you know, I had to see where she's coming from. You know, the thing about, yeah, if you're traveling alone in Malaysia, I'm not quite sure what the question is, but if you are alone, you are a French lady, one of the things that I always would say when I do sessions with expatriate ladies is that when you are unsure of what to wear, cover up. Yeah, so I think, you know, it is very important that in Malaysia, especially among Malays, you know, the less exposure in terms of, what is it, skin, you know, probably the preferred way. So that is why you'll find that, you know, of course, when the Europeans or Americans or Australians come here, you know, this is a hot country. You know, you want to not want to cover as much, but you will find that in the Malay culture, you know, it is part of the polite system to dress the way your host wants you to be. So it is part of the respect for the other party. So when you are coming to visit me, you have to make sure that you don't dress in shorts, skimpy clothes, you know, because it will make me feel uncomfortable, especially when I have guests who are of my my ethnicity. Yeah, so I think these are some of the things that you have to be very careful about. One is about dressing. The other one is about conversation. You know, conversation in terms of mixed gender. You know, how do you do that? So I think I'm not quite sure whether I'm addressing the issues here, but I have a friend here who is Jane Rai. She is a tourist guide, and if you ever want to connect with a tourist guide who can show you and maybe tell you what are some of the things that you can do contact Jane Rai, you know. So
thank you, Asma.
Oh, hi, everybody. Yes, I think there is a lot of similarity between Malay culture and Indonesian culture in the term of collectivities and then respect, a certain time, etc. But also it's depend on the geography, on the area. In the big city like Jakarta, probably less Malay culture than in the other area in Indonesia. Like in Indonesia, in Jakarta, where I live, normally it's much more westernized. So it's for the term of gender, it's more equal, and then how you dress is not too strict. It's yes, I think it's depend on the area. But beside that, yeah, I found there is a lot of similarity between Malay culture and Indonesian culture.
I'm referring to organizations when they work within organizations. And it is paradoxical because there is an inferiority complex. I would like to call it that. And the Malaysians in the room, if you could back me up in the text chat, please. There is an inferiority complex, and I won't like to blame it on the British because they normally get the brunt of that. But I think that there is something there that we need to fix. And I don't know whether it's unique to Malays. Most of my cultural studies professors say it's not unique to anyone, because if you look at people who travel overseas, if you look at the Malays who go overseas, in Australia, in England, they get well known as very hardworking people, which some people go, like, what? But when you look at the Malays in Malaysia, it's different. And people always tell me the same thing. Like, you look at the people who are within that country, when they don't have to struggle, if the government takes care of them, then you find that there's a lot of laid backness. And I don't know if this is going to impact anything or not, but all I'm saying is this: growing up Malaysian, thinking that, wow, this is we're being taken care of and we are so complacent. I went to Brunei, and that's all I'm saying. And I saw something. So I saw a difference. So what I'm saying is, I think that it is a matter of a spectrum, it's a matter of perspective, but a lot of Malays still suffer from that inferiority complex. And I'm going to be blunt, right? When they see a European, they automatically think European is better or smarter than them, and that's the way it is. I don't know why, I don't know when exactly it happened, but a lot of my friends ask me, how is it, Nadzrin, that you can teach non-Malaysians? They are amazed. They are amazed that I have Americans in my class, and they go, wow, they come to you. And I thought, that's a bit of a reverse racism, isn't it? Are you saying that I can't do this? But we have that. And I think education system, I think parents especially, I think all of us have a role to play to give you guys better employees. So I'm going to stop right there.
Well, I don't want to go into a long thesis here because I don't know how many of you are familiar with the work of Hussein Alatas. You know, he was talking about the concept of the myth of the lazy native. And he was referring to Filipinos, Malays, you know, of the Nusantara. And a lot of it has to do with our encounter with our colonial masters. So I suppose for me, you know, the fact that the new economic policy is an affirmative action. You know, it has its pluses and minuses. I'm a product of the NEP because when it was introduced in the 1960s, all of us went abroad to study. We went abroad to study on government scholarships, you know, and I think after 10 years after that, you know, the government was still giving scholarships and opportunities for Malays to study abroad. And I think this was the beginning of, you know, Malay professionals coming into the workforce. Because before that, you know, it's very difficult to find Malay engineers, Malay accountants, you know, in the workforce. But because of that NEP, you know, the new economic policy, and education was the solution, a lot of Malays gain, you know, employment. Now, what I see now is sometimes carried to the extreme, the new economic policy can also create people who are dependent. Yeah. So when they are dependent, they will always seek for help. And as a result, when you talk about being resilient, being agile, that can be problematic. So I think what we need to do is to create a new view where I think Malays have to struggle, you know, have to develop that resilience. I don't know how, But, you know, when you're talking about the new normal, you know, things that are going to happen when this lockdown is over, you know, I just wonder, you know, how will the Malays thrive and survive?
I think I'm going, because we've overrun by about 18 minutes. Also, I still see that many of you hang on with us, but I think it's a good time. And I think your conclusion, Asma, on resilience is a good thing. So looking at the evaluation we had if you have an answer, I'll leave the poll until you go, but it's heartening to see that most of you did find the session highly relevant or relevant. More than 90% almost were there. And also that you all believe that addressing culture and developing cross-cultural competencies is really important for teams and organizations. So I hope this is the first of many other sessions to create that community of better understanding. I would like to really thank you, Asma and Nadzrin, for joining me on that experiment today. And thank you all for joining. Yes, thank you, Asma, for this. As a nice conclusion to the session. So we will be sharing with you the recording. If you have any questions or anything, just reach out, and we'll be sharing a little bit more material with you in order on the topic for you to go further and read deeper on the subject. A last word, Asma?
No, thank you very much, Marie, for hosting this. I hope it will be the beginning of many more seminars to come.